Joining us, MS Now senior legal reporter Lisa Rubin, MS Now Justice and Intelligence reporter Ken Delaney, and New York Times chief White House correspondent and MS Now contributor Peter Baker, and former Georgia federal prosecutor Amy Lee Copeland. Peter, let's start with the obsession. Donald Trump won in 2024. He is the president again. Why can he not let 2020 go?
Well, because if he lets 2020 go, it undermines his entire, narrative to his people, his base, that he has been cheated, that he has been, the victim of this grand conspiracy of Democrats and never Trump Republicans who have been out to get him for more than a decade at this point. He is pursuing so many different ways of trying to prove this overarching worldview of his, including investigations of the investigations that he had to go through, including firing any FBI agents or prosecutors who worked on the January 6 cases. So many different ways, you point out a lot of them in the intro, to enforce his version of reality so that the history books somehow remember that he actually was elected 3 times instead of twice. Now, there's no reason to believe that is ever going to be proven, at least to the satisfaction of anybody other than his core supporters. But he has discovered that the more he says something, no matter how untrue, no matter how many times his own people have told him it's not true, if he says it enough times and he says it with, passion, a lot of his own supporters tend to believe him.
But Peter, how are we still talking about this? How are we still talking about this? Why does he care anymore? I mean, he won again. He's president right now. Why does he have to go back? Why can't he just let it go?
Well, I think he was radicalized in some ways in the last 4 years, the 4 years before he came back to office. He became, of course, indicted 4 times, convicted of 34 felonies, found liable in civil court for business fraud, for sexual abuse, and so on. And I think that, he is out to use this term in office to get back at everybody that he thinks wronged him. And that includes the people that he argues somehow in some mysterious way stole the election from him. And you're right. You would think that he, having won, could move on, but that's just not his style. He wants to go back and find something, anything he can hang a hat on and say, see, I was right and everybody else was wrong.
All right, let's talk about the facts of what we know about what's happening right now, because we are here and there are things happening. Bloomberg is reporting, Ken, that the Attorney General Pam Bondi has given St. Louis U.S. Attorney Thomas Albus a special appointment with nationwide authority to probe voter fraud. Explain why that's significant here.
Yeah, and I should say I haven't yet to confirm that story, but no reason to doubt it. It's significant because, as Mark Warner said in the last hour, normally the U.S. Attorney in Atlanta would be leading this probe because it's happening in Atlanta. But instead, you have this Missouri prosecutor leading it. And apparently, he's been given this nationwide remit to investigate voter fraud. And who is Thomas Albus? Well, he was a career federal prosecutor, 17 years in the Justice Department. But then he went to work for Eric Schmidt when he was the Attorney General of Missouri. Now, Eric Schmidt is one of the most conservative U.S. senators now, very MAGA guy. So that tells you a little bit about Albus, where he's coming from. And it's interesting that they didn't get the prosecutor in Atlanta to oversee this case. And we also reported last week that the special agent in charge of the FBI field office in Atlanta was pushed out of his job. We don't know if those two things are related, but some people suspect that they are. Nothing about this is normal, Katie. It's true that the FBI had to show a magistrate judge some kind of new evidence in order to secure this search warrant. We don't know what that evidence was because it's under seal. But this whole raid and investigation is giving a lot of people a lot of heartburn.
So a couple laws cited in the search warrant, Amy, and I want you to explain them. One is U.S. Code 20701, 52 U.S. Code, the retention and preservation of records regarding elections. And then there's 52 U.S. Code 2511. Can you explain why those are important in this particular case?
Sure, Katie. Those are the ones that the government said that if they were allowed to go through the warehouse of the clerk of court in Fulton County, they would find evidence of those particular violations. The first one requires voters, voting authorities to hold on to ballots, hold on to other information for a period of 22 months. If you don't do that and you act willfully, it's a misdemeanor. It's also subject to fine. So willfully means that you have to know what you're doing. You don't have to know you're violating the law, but you have to know that you've willfully gotten rid of stuff. This strikes me, if there was anything that was amiss, it's a clerical error. The second one is simply saying that anyone who willfully and knowingly interferes with ballots, with tabulation, with those sorts of things would be guilty of a felony up to 5 years. Again, willfully and knowingly doesn't mean, you have to know you're violating the law, but you have to know you're doing a bad act. Those are pretty high mental standards to meet down the road. But that is what that's what the FBI has submitted an affidavit saying they think they can find evidence of in this.
How high is the standard to get a warrant?
It is just probable cause. The magistrate judge, Judge Salinas, had to look at the four corners of the warrant. She had to be a fair and impartial judge. She just had to determine that based on the government showing, was it more likely than not that they would find evidence of these types of violations there. Pretty low standard.
Interesting. Lisa, the place where this is happening is really significant.
Yes.
Again, because Donald Trump in 2020 was calling Brad Raffensperger and saying, I need to find these votes. I need to find 11,700 and whatever votes, just the perfect amount that he needed in order to win Georgia. It's also where his special attorney, Rudy Giuliani, personal attorney, was claiming that there was fraud happening in plain sight. There was a hard drive being passed between two women. It turned out later to be a ginger chew. But explain the significance more broadly of this Georgia facility.
This Georgia facility, I think, Katie, most importantly, is the place that since litigation has taken place in the state of Georgia, and I'm talking about the Fani Willis criminal case against President Trump and many of his allies, as well as civil litigation, many of the 2020 records that they were seeking, and perhaps all of the 2020 records from the Fulton County election, the general election, have been stored at the place where they searched yesterday. And that's not just because it's the election office. The clerk of court for Fulton County, Georgia, also has their own office there, where all of this stuff was under seal by an order of a Fulton County Superior Court judge named Robert McBurney. If that name sounds familiar to you or our viewers, it's because he was the judge that we first saw preside over that special grand jury that allowed Fani Willis to proceed with her investigation. There is some question, I think, in people's minds. If a state court judge says documents are supposed to remain under seal, does the FBI have the right to then obtain a federal search warrant and get those documents in service of an investigation for federal criminal purposes? That's a big open question right now. Certainly Fulton County honored the search warrant yesterday, but one question I have is, are they going to continue to take this lying down, or will we see Fulton County go to court to try and invalidate the search warrant, get a return of their property, or otherwise say there's something defective about this warrant in the future, in the coming days, Katie?
So Ken, is it fair to really question what's happening there, to be really skeptical and concerned about what the FBI might be looking for? They did have to get a warrant. They had to have a judge sign off on it. They got that. They do say that the authorization was for all physical ballots from the 2020 general election, the tabulator tapes, the voting machines, the voter rolls from 2020, some other documentation. Is it fair to get really nervous and uncomfortable about what might be happening?
Of course it's fair, Katie, because, look, the FBI of today is not the FBI of a year ago. It's been radically transformed. That doesn't mean there aren't good people working in career jobs as agents and supervisors in the FBI, but a lot of good people have left because they're uncomfortable with the things they've been asked to do. And this is a Justice Department that's made no bones about its efforts to pursue Donald Trump's enemies and Donald Trump's agenda. It doesn't have the independence that we've normally expected of our Justice Department in the post-Watergate era. So, yes, it's fair to be skeptical. It's also fair to take into account the fact that an independent magistrate judge had to look at this evidence. So it's very similar to the situation with John Bolton. They're investigating John Bolton about whether he had classified information. They got a search warrant to search his house. And we have a little more confidence in that case than we do in the cases against, for example, James Comey or Letitia James, where there wasn't that kind of independent review. Nonetheless, this area of election, materials, which is the purview of the states and localities, when you have the federal government, swooping in there and grabbing up ballots, that is a matter that everyone, I think, should be a little bit concerned about.
And then, Ken, why was Tulsi Gabbard there? Do we know?
We don't know, but as I've said in the last hour, Georgia and Fulton County has been the subject of conspiracy theories involving foreign involvement in U.S. elections. They've all been debunked, those theories, by the U.S. intelligence community itself. Tulsi Gabbard oversees U.S. intelligence agencies. And, you know, is she there because she is pursuing some theory of foreign involvement? That's one piece of speculation. The FBI, I can tell you, was not happy that she was there. She was not invited by them. So what her agenda is, really, it's an open question.
All right. And Peter, just one last question. Do you have any indication that the president knew about this?
I haven't heard that, but I would be surprised if he didn't. Look, he has made very clear, as Ken just said, that the FBI in this term is not an independent branch. It is not some organization that has autonomy to pursue things based on the law and practice, but in fact is his instrument of political power. He's made very clear about that. It would be surprising if he did not know about it. He might say he didn't. He often does say that about things he later turns out to have known about. He certainly made clear to people like Kash Patel and people like Pam Bondi that he expects them to find evidence to prove his, his version of reality, even though so far no evidence of any sort has ever turned up that suggests that he lost that or that he actually won that election.